Well, for more on trends in the arms trade, I spoke to international security expert Jim Walsh. I asked him which countries caught his eye at the moment.
South Korea has been the #1 buyer of arms, and that makes sense both because they have a top 13 economy. They are quite wealthy by international standards, and they have security problems. They're looking across the border at North Korea. North Korea is firing off nuclear tests and missile tests, and then procuring weapons by South Korea is both a way that it will seek to advance its defense, but it's also a way politically for South Korean leaders to signal to their own domestic population that they're taking the threat seriously. They're not just standing there, they're moving forward to try to defend themselves. Now, some of those arms that South Korea buys may be more destabilizing, that is to say, make South Korea less safe rather than more safe. But if you're president of South Korea, you want to be able to say to your population you're doing everything you can to protect them. The other region of the world, again, no shocker here, is the Middle East. In particular, Saudi Arabia. We've seen Saudi Arabia involved in a number of conflicts in the region, supporting militants mostly, frankly, who are fighting in Syria against the Assad government. But more recently, we have Saudi Arabia organizing a coalition to fight what is essentially in a Yemen civil war, and a lot of its military assets, planes and other material has been devoted to that conflict.
Now, Jim, you mentioned Saudi Arabia, and right now there are campaigners in the UK who are threatening legal action in the UK to stop arms sales to Saudi Arabia for fear of these weapons ending up being used in attacks in Yemen. What sort of impact do you think political pressure has when it comes to arms sales?
Well, I think it can be useful, and those questions being asked in certain European capitals are also being asked on Capitol Hill in the United States. There was recently a congressional report released on arms sales and an interest in greater scrutiny and transparency about sales to Saudi Arabia. And I think the concern there is really twofold. One is the use of the weapons by the Saudi forces themselves. Many aid agencies, observers on the ground in Yemen have complained that the Saudi Arabian Air Force and other Saudi-backed forces have indiscriminately used their armaments in a way that has led to wide-scale civilian deaths. The other aspect relates more to Syria and the sort of regional conflicts where Saudi Arabia and Iran are competing by proxies, and that is Saudi Arabia buying weapons and then either transferring those weapons to proxies or facilitating the purchase of those weapons, either in black markets or open markets.
Now Jim, you mentioned transparency. So if I'm a government or I'm a business owner and I'm trying to sell my weapons, sell my goods, what sort of safeguards are put in place to make sure that what I'm selling actually ends up with my intended buyer and perhaps not being diverted off to a criminal network?
Well, I think there are two things here worth noting. One, we're really in our infancy here. We've had this international treaty on arms sales and arms transfers. It's reached its 1-year birthday this week. But as far as treaties go, that's a baby that's still in the cradle. We're relatively new in this game. Arms sales have been around as long as there have been arms, but our institutions to regulate them are quite new. And so that's part of it. The other part of the problem is this is just a very, very difficult thing to do. Even when the international community tries to track sensitive technologies that might be used for weapons of mass destruction, that's a challenge. You know, trying to track whether a Kalashnikov ends up where it's supposed to, very, very difficult, inherently difficult. The countries of the world could be doing more, and I hope they will do more, but it is inherently a tough problem.
Also, we have the illicit arms market. So you have your traditional arms market and also illicit arms. How has that compared with the traditional arms market in the last 15 years? Which has seen more growth?
Well, I haven't looked at the numbers recently. I would say the major, my sense is both have grown. I don't know what the relative rate is. Both have grown. But I think the distinction between the two markets is the level of sophistication of armament. So how do arms get transferred illicitly. Sometimes it's a matter of a shifting battlefield, and we've seen this with ISIL or ISIS, where ISIS invades Iraq. The Iraqi army turns and runs. They did so in the initial conflict. And then ISIL is able to gather up all these weapons, and take over weapons depots and all that goes with capturing territory. And then they're able to either keep those weapons or repair them or sell them to others. There is a distinction between the two, and the distinction is primarily one of sophistication. So the weapons that the Saudis are buying from the U.S. are far more sophisticated, missiles and planes and artillery, far more sophisticated than you can buy on the illicit market. But unfortunately, for many of these conflicts I just mentioned in the Middle East and Africa, a Kalashnikov is good enough to kill your enemy. And so even small arms, and that's what they call it, the small arms trade, is a deadly trade.